Good morning. It's good to be here. You know, everybody told me that the summer months were going to be really slow in Washington, D.C., and that sort of everybody gets out of town. And my experience so far is that's not true. Didn't quite work out that way. When I used to work at Microsoft, we would have everybody come up when we did recruiting in June and July, and we told them it was, this is what Seattle was like all year round. It was the only time of year when it was nice and sunny every day, and a few people believed it in any case. But last summer we had OPM, so that was a reason to be busy. We don't have OPM this summer, but we're still really, really busy and focused on an area that is the topic of what you're here to talk about today, which is how do we do a better job end-to-end in cybersecurity? Earlier this week, we announced a part of our cybersecurity national action plan aimed at a people dimension. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes on that today to talk about why that's so important. And then I'll touch on a couple of other things that I want to continue to draw your attention to. But before I do that, I just want to say thanks to all the suppliers who are here, Mark in particular, Palo Alto Networks, VMware, a number of the other companies, because I think it is the partnership that we have with our supplier community from a technology perspective that's a part of the solution to our continuing to make progress on this. And we need the best minds of all involved. It's not just federal employees. It's not just, the technology companies. It's not just academia. It's a broad cross-section of these. And the more we can collaborate and come together and figure out what the right solution is, I think the better off we'll be. And it's those collaborative relationships that I think will really move us forward. And before I get into the main topics I wanted to talk about, there is one ask that I have of you right up front. I think one of the biggest challenges we have today, and I'm talking about specifically our relationship with the important suppliers that we have, is we don't have a good mechanism today for unsolicited proposals. Our process has evolved to the point where it's not in a supplier's interest, in most cases, to give us an unsolicited proposal. We have a process that ultimately discourages that, and I think keeps some of the best ideas from being proposed and also ultimately getting implemented. So it's one of the things I want to work on in the time that we have left, is to figure out how to get more of those creative juices and creative proposals going while maintaining a competitive landscape and many of those things. It's a mechanism that as a private sector CIO I relied on a lot, and some of the very best ideas I got came from our supply community and others who gave us unsolicited proposals without us having to do a RFP or some of those kinds of things. So work to be done. But let me talk about the people side of this for a moment and highlight a few of the things that we announced this week. In response to the growing number of cybersecurity challenges we knew we faced as a federal government, we introduced the Cyber Security National Action Plan a few months ago. And one of the key elements of that was a recognition that there was both a serious shortfall in terms of the number of people that we had in the federal government devoted to this area, but also a recognition that our approach needed some strengthening, that we needed to create more of a common sense of what we needed to do and where we needed to go, and the kinds of talent and skills that were going to be required for the future. And it's easy to think of, cybersecurity skills as people sitting behind screens, watching, traffic flows or doing some of the traditional kinds of things that come to mind. But what we realized was that there's a whole bunch of cybersecurity skills, including people that have very domain-specific knowledge. We need people with cyber skills who have economics backgrounds, who have human behavior backgrounds, have a variety of different skills. And we weren't, in the main, attracting, developing, and encouraging and incenting people with those wide variety of skills, not only to come work in the federal government, but to even consider cybersecurity as a place where they could apply their skills. So the plan that we've introduced is, I think, a good first step at addressing some of those issues. If you'll recall from our prior conversations, we identified a shortfall of about 10,000 cybersecurity professionals across the federal government. Now that's no small number. And anytime you try to make up a gap of 10,000 anything, you've got some serious work to do. Think of the number you'd have to hire every single day just to make up a 10,000 gap. It can be a little daunting. And in a world where the supply is short in the first place. So you've got to get creative and you've got to do some things that are different than what we were doing. Now on top of that, we realized, and probably rightfully so, that we were ripe for the picking as well. That industry loves to hire people with good government experience in the cybersecurity area. So not only did we have some issues around attracting and retaining and training, which we've addressed, but we were also losing ground from a attrition perspective. And that's not good and makes the 10,000 gap even more daunting. Now I have some good news to report. Based on our latest measurement, we're not only making progress, but we're gaining ground. And I think in part it's because people realize that we're taking this seriously and that we mean business, and that coming to work in the federal government in a cybersecurity role doesn't have to mean that you're making a commitment for the rest of your life. Come and work with us for a couple of years is really great and something that I think is attractive to a lot of people. Now, if you want to stay for a career, we're happy to have that as well. But let me talk about some of the specific things that we outlined. The first one is retention for top performers. In the federal government, doing a good job sometimes doesn't have the rewards that you would expect to see in the private sector. And we realized that we needed to do a lot more in terms of retention of key talent that we had. So we've chartered OPM to address this particular area, and we've given them 6 months to create the specific plans for that. Leverage existing programs, deliver best practices, focus on performance management, talent development, and compensation flexibility for those high-performing folks. We also realized that in the government, training was one of the challenges. What we saw were a number of good training programs and initiatives, but very inconsistent in terms of the way they were done, the way they were administered, the ways in which training in one agency was recognized by another agency, and so on. So we've asked for DHS, NIST, and DoD to come together and focus on this area to help us improve and more standardize our training. And as I mentioned, focus on some disciplines that are perhaps not the traditional areas as well. in order to do cybersecurity well, we've got to have people from multiple disciplines. We realized we needed a good orientation program, a way for people to feel like they're not only starting the job well, but members of a community that is important to us. And so we've given OPM, NIST, DoD, OMB, and others the charter to deliver that. And then we had a focus on the mid-career person as well, career paths, make sure that people who come work in the federal government know what their next potential opportunities are, and so that there's a clear understanding of where I can go and what diverse training experiences I might be able to get if I'm interested in really furthering a career in this space. That includes rotational assignments and other interesting assignments so that you get a broad and diverse set of experiences while you're working in the federal government. And as I've toured some of our departments and agencies over the last year and a half or so, there's some really cool stuff that you can work on and some really cool cybersecurity challenges. We were just out yesterday with Renee Wynn at Goddard at the Space Center here locally, and learned about some of the interesting things they're doing to protect things that are flying around in space. There's some really interesting challenges there, things that you don't come across in your everyday business. But it's highlighting those kinds of opportunities and those unique things that I think can make a career in cybersecurity, especially in the federal government, particularly interesting. So there's a lot of things that we can do in this space. We can leverage the NICE framework that was developed, and I think we have a shot at really making this one of the cornerstones of the work that we've done and the lessons that we've learned over the last few months. So I appreciate everybody's support who contributed to this effort, and you'll see more from us over the next several months. But I'm pretty excited about finally at least getting what I think is positive inertia in this people space. Because what we all realize is, even with the best technology, if you don't have the skilled talent and the people who can help execute it, it doesn't do much for you. You can have all the automation in the world, but you still need to have people, who procure it, who operate it, who make decisions around what the outcomes are that come off the tools and so on. So it's a pretty important area. Now I want to mention a couple of other things as a part of the progress we're making. All of this is really great. All the technology in the world, all the people initiatives, but you have to have an insertion point. You have to have a way of implementing all these great ideas. And one of the things that the federal government has been stuck on to some degree is figuring out what that insertion point is. And it's been a key blocker for making progress in the federal government. I'm going to give you a little quiz, as I've done before, just to bring the point home. How many of you have some sense of how federal government funding for programs works? Raise your hand. Quite a few of you. That's good. Here's what I didn't know when I took the job a year and a half ago. I didn't really know how that worked. Like a lot of people on the outside, I thought, why can't they just change their decisions? Why can't they just decide what they should spend money on and go do the right thing? I didn't realize how hard it was. I didn't realize that spending for IT, spending in this case for cybersecurity, was just a small fraction of a program budget across 7,000 different investments across the federal government. And that if you're a CIO for a federal agency and you wanted to do something different, in effect what you had to do was go around and tin cup whatever percentage of the 7,000 programs there were in your agency to go get the funding to do anything. So you can have all the great ideas in the world, but if you're sent out on the street corner with a tin cup to beg for dollars, good luck. It's not going to work particularly well. So we put together the IT Modernization Fund proposal as a way of jump-starting the investment and getting momentum on replacing and upgrading and modernizing legacy technology. It's got broad bipartisan support at this particular point, and I'm quite hopeful that we're going to be able to get this through Congress. Now what it does is it takes that tin cupping away in one sense and allows agencies to come together and figure out what the right thing to do and then have a source to go to where they can in effect get a loan to upgrade and modernize the technology, the infrastructure, and the cybersecurity for systems in their federal agency or even across federal agencies. And to do so, they'll have to make a business case. And one of the key points of this is you'll have to pay it back. Now this is the point usually where a lot of my federal friends groan. Say, ooh, paying back. I don't know about that. We don't know how to do that. And it's probably true that we don't have the mechanisms in place that make this an easy thing to understand today or to execute. But we'll work that out. But I'll tell you one thing. I am convinced that the payback is not going to be the problem. Much of the legacy technology that we have in place today and that we use to operate the federal government is so old and so costly to operate that the simple act of replacing it and modernizing it will provide savings beyond what it costs to upgrade and replace it. We've missed the curve, the technology economic curve for multiple generations. And I think at the end of the day, payback's not going to be the problem. We will need help from our CFO partners in the agencies. We'll need help from program managers and others to make it happen. But the dollars, I think, are there. And at the end of the day, what we really want to do is spend the money that we have more efficiently on more modern, more up-to-date, more secure technology systems, applications, and approaches. And that's why this is so important. And my plea is to all of our friends in Congress is don't make us continue to go around and tin cup. We need to make progress on this, and we need to get the investment cycle going. I have direct experience with this at a number of companies, and I know for a fact that when you start a regular replacement, regular upgrade practice, it can be self-sustaining for a really long time. It's like riding a wave. Once you get on the wave, you can pick up energy and accelerate along the way. But we need to get the clock started. And it's not that some agencies haven't been able to do individual things, because there's some great work going on across federal agencies, but it's usually the result of a crisis or some other unnatural event that it's taking place. It's not the regular course of business in most of our agencies, and we need to change that cycle. So any help you can provide and support for ITMF, I appreciate. The last area I want to talk about today is transition. And I know this was on the minds of many people today. But I wanted to just spend a minute around what my goals are for transition. My hope is that when the next administration comes in, that we'll have on the desk of every incoming person who's responsible for IT in any way a pretty robust set of information that provides a contextual assessment of where we are today, what the current challenges are, and the initiatives that are already underway to make progress on those things. In effect, a roadmap for the future. I think it would be very bad for us to leave behind a blank whiteboard, an empty desk, and no plan for the future. And so right now, one of the reasons it's so busy is we're actively working on that situational assessment, the roadmap for the future, and a guide to the initiatives and programs that are already underway to try to attack this most critical area. And I know some of you are already working on that, but it's a key piece of the work that we need to do in the next number of months. And we're anxiously awaiting the results of the commission that the president put together on cybersecurity. The commission is off and meeting, and I think is tackling some of these big issues as well. And so I look towards the end of the year and post-election, a really concrete dialogue and a serious conversation about what we have to do in the months and years ahead in terms of improving systems in the federal government, how we engage with citizens, and improving our cybersecurity. So I'd be happy to take a few questions, and we can get on with the rest of the program. And again, thank you for your support. I think we have mic runners, so if you have a question, raise your hand and they'll come find you. There's one over here. Yeah, it's a great question. The question was if we considered a military-style academy, to making sure that there was a guaranteed supply of talent and so on. We did look at it, and it's one of the things that we're still kind of looking at is, how you would actually do that. Frankly, we made the determination that that would be a fairly heavy lift to get done. The model that we're kind of a little more interested in now is one where you have a core curriculum at colleges and universities all over the place, and then leveraging the specialties that college or university has. So you might have a college or university that specializes in, say, they're an institution that's known for economics or for other kinds of things. And that combined with a core cyber curriculum could deliver the people that you need that have that kind of background, but also a core cyber background. So our thinking was that we could deliver more sooner through that kind of a model than by establishing a formal academy. But I'm particularly really interested in that idea, and it's something we'll continue to pursue. Yeah, so that's already in the plan, is a whole set of enhancements in terms of scholarships for service and tuition forgiveness and those kinds of things. Yes.
I'm just curious how you came up with the number. I believe it's 3.1 billion for the modernization program.
3.1, just to be clear.
I think that's what I said. 3.1.
Yeah.
How did you arrive at that number? I'm just curious. I'm not challenging it. I'm just.
Yeah. Well, in federal government, the degree of precision, can be off a little bit. But what we did was. what we did is we triangulated in on the number, frankly. We looked at estimates from a whole bunch of different ways, and it kind of ended up focusing us on this number with not, 3 or 4 places of decimal place precision. But we looked at what the installed base of technology was and its age, and made some estimates around the replacement cost. I used also industry standard formulas for this. So one of them was, for every dollar you spend on acquiring something, you'll spend 15 to 25 cents supporting it and maintaining it over its useful life, kind of thing. And then we know what happens with technology costs over time in terms of the lower cost for bigger capacity. We also used the installed base that we got from several of our key suppliers in terms of what was expiring and what would need to be replaced and so on. And so it was interesting. Most of the modeling we did came in around that number, and we, in fact, many of them were higher. But that was a number that where we kind of ended up.
From a federal perspective, are we giving up on identifying the perpetrators of these attacks and breaches and stuff, and just focusing entirely on preventing it?
I wouldn't characterize what we're doing in that way at all. I think that, a lot of this I can't talk about here, but there's a very active, I think, group of people in the federal government who are exclusively focused on that, and I don't see us giving up on that at all. One of the things that I do know, though, is that tactics change over time, and cyber is just such a fast-moving area that if you're not paying attention to the what, but also the who, you can be blindsided. And so I think it's a very, very important area for us to continue focus on not only the what, but also the who and the how that they're doing it. One of the most intriguing things to me is some of the trends that we've seen recently around business process decomposition and looking for ways that organizations can be exploited by really understanding how their business processes work and where weak spots in that can be. The easy stuff of just doing some sort of electronic incursion, we're making a lot harder, and so the bad guys are now figuring out where the next open doors are, and this business process decomposition, I think, is potentially a fertile area and something we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to. It's one of the reasons we need people with diverse backgrounds in the cybersecurity space. People who understand how our business processes work, people who understand human behavior in ways that we hadn't necessarily paid a lot of attention to before, and that'll help us get out in front of some of these upcoming challenges. In the back, or got some. You go where you want to go. How's that?
Thank you. Where is the ITMF in terms of being approved? What can folks in this room do to support it? And what questions should we ask Congressman Hurd when he's here?
Well, I think, first of all, Will's been, I think a big fan of improving cybersecurity and so on. But the question I would ask any of our people in Congress is, if you got a better idea, get it out there. But if you don't, get on, with this one. This is a big crisis in my mind. This isn't a, sit around, look at your navel and figure out something, 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. This is a current crisis. It's one of those things that's not going to get better with age. And we've just got to get on with the business of upgrading and modernizing and do it with vigor and with enthusiasm. And it's not a political issue. It's just not, there's nobody who thinks, you know, and that I've met, including Will, who says we should just suck at, you know, serving the American people. That's just not what anybody wants to do. But that's where we're headed if we don't do something. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it, and thanks for your support.